In Bolivia, the first trial against the former de facto president, Añez, began, as she faces charges of duties and compliance and unconstitutional resolutions after assuming power in 2019. Political movements in Uruguay denounced that the government of Luis Lacalle Pou handed over the port of Montevideo to a multinational for 50 years. At least 6 people were killed and 13 others wounded in a suicide attack at El Gab Junction in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On Thursday in Bolivia, the first trial against the former de facto president, Añez, began, as she faces charges of duties and compliance and unconstitutional resolutions after assuming power in 2019. The trial, dubbed Coup d'etat 2, started on Thursday despite Añez's hunger strike this Wednesday in the Miraflores female prison located in La Paz as a way to delay the legal procedures. The trial unfolds in the middle of a wide political and social expectation since Añez will face the charges for the coup d'etat made last November 12, 2019, when she self-proclaimed the president without meeting up the requirements, after the former president Evo Morales was forced to resign. The prosecutor's office announced that it has requested a maximum sentence of 10 years against Añez. Let's remember, Añez not only took over the presidency, but also green-lighted the massacres of Sacaba and Sencara against the pro-Morales protesters, as well as the embezzlement and stealing of public national assets. And Nicaragua bolsters relations with China, as this Wednesday the Foreign Relations Committee of the Nicaraguan Parliament recognized cooperation agreements between the Central American nation and the Asian giant. The committee consulted officials from the Chancellery, the Ministry of Industry, Development and Commerce, and the Attorney General's office regarding the content and the scope of the document. This way, a joint release of the mutual recognition was established, as well as the re-establishment of diplomatic ties based on respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. The pacts subscribed by both governments also include the principles of non-aggression and non-intervention. In this sense, lawmaker Iris Montenegro highlighted the importance of strategic alliances with the Asian giant in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. With this agreement and the treaty, we will also have the attitude to also participate in the aspects that the route and silk belt means, so that our products and our country can also have access to the other countries that are within this strip on the route and silk in the area of trade. On Thursday, the Mayan Quechua indigenous communities of Agua Caliente in Guatemala asked the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to guarantee their collective right of determination over their ancestral lands, while the government has asked the court to dismiss the case. The lawsuit is a way to hold the Guatemalan state accountable for the detriment of the Maya Quechua community of Agua Caliente due to the lack of internal legislation to guarantee the right to collective property after 4 years of requests and the scarce of proper resources to demand the protection of their rights. The case also refers to the open-pit nickel mining project of the indigenous territories. The community's attorney, Jorge Flores, stated that the exploitation permits were granted without the consent of the indigenous group.
The high official affirmed that her organization is closely following the warnings of a country's indigenous people, especially the Nasa peoples of Rio Negro, in the department of Huila. The Regional Indigenous Council of that region has denounced the attack with an explosive device against the reservation in the village of San Miguel and the municipality of Equira. After the attack, they launched an appeal for help to the country's human rights organizations and the national government to guarantee their lives in the midst of the harsh confrontations between the illegal armed groups on the border of the departments of Huila and Cauca. At present, indigenous communities of Colombia are on a high alert due to the seriousness of the situation.
In Peru, President Pedro Castillo has strongly condemned and rejected the claims of existence of a parallel cabinet, a theory spread by opposition sectors. The president has clarified that the claims are contrary to his ethics and moral. According to the Peruvian president, opposition sectors have falsely maintained that he intends to shut down the Congress to take all the power. Castillo considers that the authors of this smear campaign only intend to impede his government and that the great demands of the country continue to be prioritized, such as the issue of insecurity, which has become a crucial topic for the Peruvian executive. Castillo expressed that he has come to power with the purpose of serving the country, contrary to the opposition groups that have turned their backs on the country for years.
We have come here with the purpose of serving the country, and we want to tell you that here they have been creating ghosts, sometimes unknown voices that do not go with our ethics, with our morals. They have created a shadow cabinet, which I strongly reject. They have been created saying that we want to shut down the Congress to make some laws for us because we want to stay in power. Because it comes from the other side that does not see or live as a regional governor does in front of his people, who do not want these great demands to be prioritized, for example. And on top of that, there are problems such as the problem of citizen insecurity. Why do you think that we have appointed our previous Minister of Justice as a Prime Minister? Because we have to modify certain norms. We have to make the laws for those who commit crimes a little more drastic.
Now we continue. A Salvadoran woman was released on Wednesday after being imprisoned for more than 10 years after suffering an obstetric emergency that caused an abortion, which is classified in the Central American country as aggravated homicide. Morena Herrera, the president of the Citizens Association for the Decriminalization of Abortion in El Salvador, took to Twitter to celebrate the release of the convicted woman known as Elsie and to advocate for the decriminalization of abortion in the Central American country. Elsie is the fifth woman prosecuted and convicted on suspicion of having an abortion to be released by the authorities in the Central American country since December 2021. Human rights activists estimated that in the last 20 years, at least 180 women who have been sentenced under the same charges. Despite requests from the social and feminist movements, President Nayib Bukele in September stated that he will exclude any constitutional amendment in favor of the criminalization of abortion and the same-sex marriage. In Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, police severely repressed workers of the National Society of Industrial Parks who were protesting better payments and work conditions. Workers of the National Society of Industrial Parks demanded a minimum wage of 500 to 1,500 gourds, the equivalent to about $15 from an 8-hour working day, as well as transport and food subsidies as part of the benefits. The protests were also demanding a solution to the serious economic and socio-political crisis in the country. The Secretary General of the Autonomous Center of Workers of Haiti, Fignolet Saint-Cyr, denounced that for 2 years now, the minimum wage in this nation has not been readjusted, and in these conditions, they have to deal with the high inflation that plagues the country. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Political movements in Uruguay denounced that the government of Luis Lacalle Pou handed over the port of Montevideo to a multinational for 50 years. The Broad Front of Uruguay denounced this Wednesday the government headed by Luis Lacalle Pou for handing over the port of Montevideo to the multinational Cato Nati, as the government granted it the monopoly of the container terminal for 50 years. Broad sector senators allege that the executive commits serious crimes against the public patrimony. The complaint against the government's measure was filed with the public prosecutor's office. The detractors of Lacalle Pou's decision indicate that the government did not respond to any of the previous appeals and that this attitude shows the illegitimacy of handing over the port of Montevideo to a private foreign company. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights representative in Colombia, Juliet de Rivero, called on the government to respect and protect the people, referring to the violence that plagues the indigenous communities of that nation. The high official affirmed that her organization is closely following the warnings of the country's indigenous peoples, especially the Nasa peoples of the Rio Negro in the department of Huila. The Regional Indigenous Council of that region has denounced the attack with an explosive device against the preservation in the village of San Miguel in the municipality of Iquira. After the attack, they launched an appeal for help to the country's human rights organizations and the national government to guarantee their lives in the midst of the harsh confrontations between the illegal armed groups on the border of the departments of Huila and Cauca. And in Venezuela, the National Entrepreneurs HIP Service was created on Wednesday, an initiative aimed at supporting and consolidating financing mechanisms for new productive initiatives. The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, held a working session with representatives of this emerging sector and affirmed that the body will focus on guaranteeing the coordination of financial institutions and organizations linked to the business projects to move forward efficiently. As part of the launch of this service, a website has been created to consolidate a register of the country's entrepreneurs and to provide advice in all areas. In this context, the Venezuelan president urged the parliament to legislate to promote the full recovery of the country's economy. On Thursday, military forces of Russia and Belarus have started joint exercises on the territory of Belarus. Both governments have stated that these are operations for the protection of their borders. Moscow and Minsk have stated that these trainings are carried out to solve tasks of suppressing and repelling external aggression in the course of a defensive operation, as well as counteracting terrorism and protecting the interests of the Union. In particular, the troops will train in blocking arms and ammunition delivery channels, destroying armed formations and reconnaissance of the enemy. The training will last until February 20th and will be held at the Manovsky, Gorsky, Bretsky and other training grounds. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expressed frustration at the lack of progress made during high-stake negotiations with his British counterpart Liz Truss as tensions between Moscow and the West continue to flare over Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Minister said that the exchange had been like the deaf talking to the blind, and that the sides had struggled to find common ground. Truss used the meeting to urge the Kremlin to take the path of diplomacy and argued that a war in Ukraine will be disastrous for the Russian and Ukrainian people, as well as security for Europe. Lavrov hit back, however, saying that Russia has sued for diplomacy for all these years, and they continue to do so, adding that Russia has been cheated and wronged for many years when it comes to agreements and obligations from other states. The Russian Foreign Minister reiterated Moscow's position that it has no aggressive intentions in the region.
Ideologized approaches, ultimatums, threats. This is the road to nowhere. Unfortunately, many of our Western colleagues are carried away with this form of public activities, and I can't call it diplomacy.
And the French government has banned demonstrations in Paris in response to the so-called Convoy of Freedom rejecting coronavirus health restrictions. People belonging to the Yellow West Coast anti-vaccine movement and civilians in trucks, cars and motorbikes took part carrying anti-government banners and placards. They came out from different cities in order to demonstrate their discontent with the vaccination pass in force since last month. For their part, authorities indicated that after the de-escalation generated by the vaccinations, they could stop being required by the end of March or the beginning of April. However, the full vaccination schedule will continue to be essential for some travel or access to restaurants and other venues. Now we address other topics. Spain scrapped a mandate to wear masks outdoors as COVID-19 infection rates drop and hospitals report lower admissions. The rule change includes in children at school during their breaks outside between classes. However, masks remain mandatory in indoor public spaces, including public transportation and when people are unable to keep a safe distance of 1.5 meters between them. The measure reverses a step taken last December amid an unprecedented surge of infections fueled by the highly contagious Omicron variant. Official health ministry data showed how the spread of the virus gathered speed in November and peaked on January 21st at over 3,400 new infections per 100,000 residents over 2 weeks, a pandemic record. Contagion has since slowed down, with the 14-day figure dropping to just under 2,000. And the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said on Wednesday that anti-vaccine trucker protests blocking the Canada-US bridge is putting thousands of jobs and the economy at risk. The Premier said the blockade must stop and also revealed that he is working with provincial authorities to regain control. After several automobile manufacturers announced that they will have to reduce production in addition to cancelling some work shifts, the Prime Minister stepped forward to reiterate a call for dialogue with the drivers and the immediate cessation of the protests. The problems generated by the blockade of the trucks affect companies such as General Motors and Settlands, whose units cannot circulate, representing millions of dollars in losses, in a passage through which at least $400 million in goods cross daily. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. At least 6 people were killed and 13 others wounded in a suicide attack at El Gab Junction in the Somali capital Mogadishu on Thursday. Abdi Fattah Haden Hazan, Somali police spokesperson who confirmed, said a suicide bomber wearing explosive vests wrapped around his waist blew himself up, causing multiple casualties. Witnesses said the blast was huge and caused panic among the residents. The militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for Thursday's bombing in the restive city, saying its fighters targeted delegates selecting the upcoming lower house lawmakers. Angola's Minister of Justice and Human Rights stressed that more than 700 criminal prosecutions are ongoing for alleged acts of corruption. Authorities informed that the accusations respond to alleged crimes of embezzlement, corruption, money laundering, obtaining undue advantage, tax fraud, and other illicit actions in the economic and financial sphere. According to the National Asset Recovery Service of the Attorney General's Office, money and material goods have been collected inside and outside the national territory, amounting to more than $11.486 million, including factories, houses, buildings, and shares in companies. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi said that the strengthening relations with the international community as well as resolving the conflicts in Yemen and Syria are priorities for his government. The president stated that his country's foreign policy aims to strengthen relations, build trust and dialogue with countries around the world, especially with neighboring countries. Raisi noted that the nation has been plagued by terrorism, systematic crime and foreign interference, and stressed that resolving the crisis in Syria and Yemen and forming an inclusive government in Afghanistan are among his country's priorities. And China assured it will continue to adopt an active and constructive role in the attempts to set in motion the 2015 Iranian nuclear agreement as soon as possible, after the renewal of talks in Vienna between Tehran and the world powers.
Talks in Vienna to revive the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal proceed at a jerky pace China has positioned itself as a key player in the issue and reaffirmed its full readiness to continue to play a constructive role in trying to get the path back on the track as soon as possible. After the renewal in Vienna of talks between Tehran and world powers, in a new try to set the agreement in motion once again, Beijing insists that the Joint Comprehensive Plans of Actions functioning is vital for ending the growing tensions and call on all of the parties to put in efforts for the sake of an understanding.
China will continue to adopt an active and constructive role in the negotiation and will work with all of the relevant parties to ensure the agreement goes back on track on a nearby date. Negotiations have entered a critical stage, and we believe all of the involved should improve their sense of urgency, showing plain will and flexibility in order to encourage the signing of an accord as soon as possible.
Over 10 months after they started, the talks to salvage the Iranian nuclear agreement are at crucial point. The delegations have managed to narrow some gaps since the last round of talks, but serious differences persist, especially on the topic of the sanctions of the United States out to lift. China holds the United States responsible for the setback in the 2015 deals, since the current crisis was prompted by Washington's unilateral dropping out of the agreement. Chinese authorities urged the U.S. to abandon its policy of maximum repression against Iran.
As the main instigator of the Iranian nuclear crisis, the United States should correct its erroneous policy of applying never-ending pressure on Iran and eliminate all illegal sanctions against the country and third parties. On these grounds, Iran will certainly see to abiding by the terms of the agreement.
China insists on the need to resume the deal to its tension in the Middle East, allowing Iran's development and guaranteeing the diversification of its oil supply. On the other hand, experts highlight the increasing involvement of China in affairs of the region, for example, with the historical signing of a bilateral association with Iran that is set to last for 25 years, as well as the support given to Syria and the willingness to cooperate in reconciliation in Afghanistan. This is a clear sign that the Asian giant's influence in the Middle East grows as the U.S. loses its grip.
Thanks to our correspondent Iranzi Barasa for this report, and now we continue. Problems in bilateral economic and trade relations between China and the United States should be properly solved in the spirit of mutual respect and equal consultation, said the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian on Thursday.
China always advocates the spirit of mutual respect and equal consultation to properly resolve the problems arising in bilateral economic and trade relations between China and the U.S. Threats and pressures based on one's unilateral interests will not help solve problems, but only undermine mutual trust and the atmosphere for dialogue and negotiation.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.